So, like I said, in this lesson, we're going to be talking a lot more about the timeline and what things are called and what you're capable of doing in the timeline beyond just cutting and moving around clips. So a couple of facts I just want to rattle off from the Premiere Pro book about the timeline that I may not have shared with you already. So in your timeline, the timeline window holds sequences, right? So you create a new sequence, and that's what opens up in the timeline window. What you may not know is that you can open multiple sequences at the same time with each displayed in its own timeline panel. So what that means is that, as you can see here, I've got one sequence open already. It's called first sequence. And you can see that represented over here in my project window by the sequence icon. It's called first sequence. I can create a new sequence by coming down here to new item, the sequence, and it'll open up this window. I'm just going to click OK, make sure that ends up in my sequences folder, and then double click on it. And now you can see I've got two tabs in here. One's called first sequence, the other's called sequence 5. And I can have as many open as I want. The reason you would want to do that, have multiple sequences in one project, is if you're working on a longer form short film, you could actually separate each scene into its own sequence and then assemble all of them in one master sequence, and that makes it a little bit easier to manage. That's what they do on feature films. It's not just one big timeline. They actually have it split up into different sequences, and that way different people can work on different parts of the film at the same time and then import them all into one project later. Something else that you may have noticed is that the terms sequence and timeline are often used interchangeably, as in it's in the sequence or it's on the timeline. That's how I often talk, because they do feel very similar. Once you have a sequence open in your timeline window, it just is that sequence. But it is important to kind of understand the difference, even if it is subtle, between a timeline and a sequence. Once you're over in your timeline or in your sequence, we've already talked about video tracks and audio tracks, V1, V2, V3. You can add as many of those tracks as you want. The only limitation is your system, your computer, and what it can handle. But you can have up to 1,000 tracks here if you really wanted to. It just goes on and on and on. Okay, so those are just some quick facts about the timeline that are in the Premiere book. Good stuff to know. Now let's go a little bit deeper into sequences. The official definition of a sequence is a series of clips that play one after another, sometimes with multiple blended layers and often with special effects, titles, and audio to make a complete film. So in your timeline, you already know this. The timeline or sequence is where you assemble your film. So let's go ahead and make another new sequence to get started talking about sequences. I'm going to go into the Theft Unexpected folder here in my project, and I'm going to find that clip that's called Excuse Me. Not Excuse Me titled, but just Excuse Me. One other way you can create a sequence, I know I've already showed you a couple of ways, is to take that clip and drag it onto the new item button down here at the bottom of the screen. It looks like a page with a corner folded over. So if I drag that clip called Excuse Me onto the new item button, it will automatically create a new sequence for me. And it called it Excuse Me -00035_1. because that was the name of the clip that I made it from. Right after you create the new sequence, it'll already be highlighted in your project window. Now's a good point to give that a different name. If our short film is called Theft Unexpected, calling our sequence Excuse Me -00035_1 could be a little confusing, probably not the best idea. So I'm just gonna right click on that and click rename, and I'm going to call it Theft Unexpected. And then hit enter. All right, and you can see I changed the name of the sequence over here in my project panel, and it also changed over here on my timeline. So as you already know, just to talk a little bit more about our timeline, when we edit on the timeline, it's editing in tracks, and each track has a name. So as you can see here, my video is on track V1, and that track follows this line all the way down. Track 2, same thing. Track 3, same thing. And with audio, it works the same way. We've been talking about that already, but let's go a little bit deeper into what tracks can do for you. These names that you see over here on the left side of your timeline with all the track names actually act as more than just things to call each track. Each of these names is actually called a track header, and they act as more than nameplates. They also act as enable or disable buttons for the tracks when making selections to improve parts of a sequence or when rendering effects. On the left side of the track header, you'll see a set of buttons that represent the available tracks for the clip currently displayed in the source monitor or selected in the project panel. These are source track indicators, and they are numbered just like the timeline tracks. This helps keep things clear when performing complex edits. If you drag and drop a clip into a sequence, the position of the source track indicators is ignored. However, if you use a keyboard shortcut or the buttons on the source monitor to add a clip to a sequence, the source track indicators become important because the position of the source track indicators sets the track the new clip is going to be added to. All right, so I'm going to show you how that works. So how most of you are used to editing is by double-clicking on a clip in the source monitor, for creating an in point and an out point, and then dragging that onto your timeline and placing it on whichever track that you want it to be on. When you do that, the source track indicators, these things over here, are completely ignored because it can tell that you are manually trying to place a clip in a certain area. However, if I want to use keyboard shortcuts only to bring my clips onto the timeline, I can use these indicators to tell it, okay, when I apply that keyboard shortcut, it's going to put it for me on a certain track. So if I click on V3 up here, over here in this empty space, and then I click on my source window and use the keyboard shortcut for overwrite edit, which is a period, it will bring down that video and put it on track 3, because that's the track I have indicated. If I keep it on track 1 and do the same thing, it'll overwrite the media that I already have on that track, right? So I'm going to hit period, and you can see it added that video right in there, and then it created the cut. I can do the exact same thing with the audio tracks as well. So if I got video on V3, I probably want audio on A3. So I'm just going to change my track source indicator to be down here on A3 instead of A1, and now when I hit period, you can see it put my video on V3 and my audio on A3, because that's what these track source indicators indicate. Kind of a complex thing. Personally, it's not generally how I edit, but if I am adding a bunch of things onto my timeline at once, it does become useful. It's also necessary if you deleted all the audio from all of your clips and have to bring it back, which is a problem often in sports editing. The track indicators become very important. These indicators also work as a way to only bring down audio or only bring down video. So instead of moving that indicator to a different track, if I just click on it on its own, it'll actually turn off that indicator, which means if I delete the clip I already dragged down, and now that V1 is turned off, I'm going to put my audio track indicator on A3. Now when I click on my source window and click period, it only brought the audio down. It didn't bring down the video. Even though V1 is still on track 1, because it's not turned on, it's not lit up, it's not going to bring the audio down. That also becomes important if you're dragging and dropping. If these track source indicators aren't turned on, and I click here and drag down, you can see it's not bringing down my video. I'm trying to place video on track 1 and it won't do it. However, if I come down below that center line, I do have the audio. Okay, and this also works vice versa if you're making a music video or something and your clips have audio but you don't actually want the audio as part of the video. I can just keep V1 on and turn off A1, and now every time I drag a clip down, you can see it only has the video and it doesn't have audio. And if I drag that into the under half, it's not going to place it because it doesn't have any audio to place. It's only going to bring down the video. Those are the situations where track source indicators, I think, become very useful. If you only don't need audio for a single clip, or there's only like a small situation in which you want to put something on track 3 instead of track 1, I would keep them on V1 and A1. It's the natural place. But if you're changing a lot or doing a lot of different things, it can definitely speed you up if you change which tracks are being indicated as your target tracks.